we will record this, and if folks need this, we can share that. Sorry about that. We're going to start with kind of just a quick history and a little overview. This funding, we think, has been in place probably since the 60s. It's a little hard to tell. It's pretty unique. You guys may know that the county, which I used to manage the county money, wound up using the city process. We think it was an attorney that came up with this, but in Missouri, local governments cannot give grants. So someone came up with this idea of a purchase of service model way back when, and it's really served us well. I think it's allowed us to keep doing this. It also, over the years, as budgets have tightened, has really allowed us to show City Council that we, really specifically what we buy. And in the last 15 years, we've incorporated the performance measures so that we can talk about not just what we purchase, but the effects or the outcomes of those purchases. And then more recently, trying to tie all that together with other local funders to tell a bigger story about the impact at the community level. You guys will see today that kind of one of those middle and challenging steps that we just finished was to come up with common outcomes, and we'll talk about those a bit in the presentation today. We do use an RFP process through the city, so it's not bids. We're not necessarily looking for the cheapest. That would be a bid process. So what we seek are program proposals, and then we're looking to purchase services within that larger program context. They are contracts, and let's see. I want to make sure that. Can the folks hear me okay? I want to confirm that on the Zoom. You guys can just give a thumbs up or.
Yeah, I hear you fine.
Great, thank you. I want to make sure first. And so this process, this RFP process, winds up resulting, if there are allocations made to a proposal, it winds up resulting in a contract. And so those contracts are purchase of service. I think, I don't know everyone in the room, but I know several of you have been in these contracts, but essentially we say we're going to buy this service at this rate in this amount. And then those are sent to City Council for approval. The allocation process is a joint effort by my division staff and the Human Services Commission, which is appointed by the City Council. Those are citizen volunteers. It used to be a joint city-county when we ran the county funding too, and now it's just city. And again, that's a joint process. So they read and rate the proposals. We read the proposals. We come together in closed session to discuss those. And then we come up with preliminary recommendations, which we share. Many times those involve corrections and things that we ask. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail as we talk about the process. But in the end, that results in those draft contracts we send to council. I'm sorry, the final contracts we send to council for approval. In my career, I think because we've invested so much in the process, I think it's extremely robust process, transparent, and it involves a lot of citizen input. In my career, we've mostly had council just approve those contracts. I know in my first year and before that, it tended to be much more political. So we have really focused on a couple things. One is transparency, one is consistency. The other is to really use that commission to help make those decisions because they're appointed by council. And then the last thing I think is just all the analytics that we do and the thoughtfulness that we put into these RFPs. You guys may have noticed over the years we've stopped issuing just general blanket RFPs every year to more targeted by issue area. And then in recent years, more targeted even by services based on the needs that we see. Essentially what we're trying to do, because we actually are the only funder that really provides direct services too. So I have social workers that work in my division. The theme that I always say is we're trying to buy services that we view to be needed and priority that we don't want to or can't provide ourselves. So emergency shelter. The city just does not traditionally want to get into providing emergency shelter. There are some exceptions, and those can have consequences over time. A good example is home visiting. We have one of the larger and older home visiting programs. I inherited the purchase of home visiting services with the advent of the Children's Services Fund. That has really impacted, especially this year, what we're going to buy. So the county, as you guys know, has over $7 million a year just for children and family services. You probably noticed that the city is gravitating more and more towards basic needs and opportunity services, focused more so on adults. Not entirely, but you probably noticed if you've been around for a while that is the direction kind of we're heading. But you know that we also work really, really closely with the county and the United Way, actually. So we sit down, talk about proposals, talk about contracts, really try to align our efforts and make sure we're not duplicating. It's a really unusual arrangement. I don't know of any other city in the nation that has, and now we've got the Community Foundation and Veterans United Foundation has officially joined the Boone Impact Group. You guys know we partnered to run Como Helps, and that resulted in their joining the Boone Impact Group and then making Como Helps the permanent standing emergency donations management arm of Boone Impact Group. So we've got 5 funders meeting twice a month. I think it's a really neat thing. And it results in things like using the same funding management system for the city and the county and United Way. And hopefully that saves you some time. And then some of the other things that we'll talk about today, the common taxonomy of services, the common outcomes, and then the Boone Indicators dashboard. To tie all that up in a bow, what we're basically trying to do is survive. I hate to say that. Strangely enough, the pandemic has really highlighted this work. If you'd asked me 2 years ago, we were basically fighting for our lives due to the budget situation. And now I think people have really seen the value of the work we do, but also the way that we do that together. And so basically we are kind of always in a position of trying to do the hard work that you guys do and we do and tell that story and affect change, but also frankly to keep the money flowing. If there are parts of the process that are different or perhaps more rigorous than other funding sources, please know that there has been tremendous pressure over the last 10 years to cut funding for social services. So we do everything we can to try to tell a solid story and show the impact. Okay, so that's my quick little spiel. The city, of course, launched our new website yesterday when I was going to go in and post all of our documents. So I was about 10 minutes late posting those because I had to scramble all morning to get that figured out. This is actually what the new website looks like. And if you guys haven't bookmarked them, some of the old pages are gone. So I had to update all the RFP documents and everything at 6 in the morning yesterday to try to get going on all that. So the new, the city has really changed this website to flow more vertically. So I've been around long enough that that's how it used to be. And then they wanted a bunch of sub pages, and now everybody accesses everything on a mobile device. They want everything on one vertical flowing page. So we're back to one page for the city's social services funding. You might remember we had an overview page, a contracts page, and an RFP page. That's all on one page with the menu at the top now. So if you have that bookmark like I did, you'll need to switch to this new URL. It's easy to find, and it's in the RFP documents with hyperlinks, or you can just go to the city site and search for social services funding. But everything's in kind of in one spot. I think I've got it all up to date. It was kind of a mad dash yesterday to get that all straightened out. So if you see something, just let me know, we'll get it fixed right away. So everything's on the website. And now the website, I'm going to scroll through this. The overview info is at the top. It would, if you haven't applied before, it'd behoove you to kind of check that out. I would say probably one of the most important documents if you haven't applied before are to read through the social services funding guidelines. So those are basically the rules. So if you haven't applied for or received our funding in the past, it'd be a really good idea to give that a thorough read before you submit a letter of intent, because there are things in the guidelines of the rules that definitely could preclude organizations from applying. One of the most common things is that folks don't have a third-party financial statement, for example, and also some of the requirements as far as contracting goes, which we'll touch on a bit today. Also in the overview of the taxonomy of services, which is up to date, the June version, and then the new common outcomes. And we just got our contact info. There is a link to Boone Indicator's dashboard here. It's also in Apricot, our funding management system, but it is here. A list of the current and past contracts, we move these to a toggle. So if you want to take a look at what we're currently funding or what we funded in the past, it's there. And then that separate RFP page now is all here. And so this is where you'll access the proposal documents. And what we'll do is kind of keep this up on the screen and refer to them as we go through the process. I do want to point out that the timeline is here. And I also want to point out this is going to be a split timeline. We've not done that in the past. Should be interesting. And the reason for that is council had some excess reserve funds that they wound up allocating to what they call public assistance. The housing division managed some of those. I'm managing some of those. Part of that funding included two additional things. One was an RFP for winter, extra winter emergency shelter capacity. I thought at the time I was being a bit cynical, thinking that we might want to be careful and make sure we had extra capacity because of the pandemic, even though things looked good at that time. Turns out that was fortuitous because needless to say, this winter could be rough. So we're going to be issuing that $75,000 through this RFP because it's a purchase of service. What we're looking for there is basically, for example, if you're a currently contracted provider or a current provider of homeless services, we want to see proposals that show that you're expanding capacity and or able to provide isolation and quarantine type space. So basically, we want to ensure we're definitely not interested in replacing or supplanting funds for existing programs here. What we want to see is that we're getting extra space or more capable space. That is a little bit of an accelerated timeline because we want to try to get those ready, those contracts ready to start December 1, ideally. And that period for that funding is going to be December 1 to March 31st. So a little unusual, and it's 1 year, one-time funding. Basically, the idea is to try to get us through this 21-22 winter with the hopes that we might have something more permanent in place. I know that may be a bit ambitious and we may have to revisit this, but we'll see. So that's that special part of this, what is typically the basic needs services RFP, which will follow the more traditional timeline. And those are here. So that's also in the RFP document, by the way. But we're going to be referring back to this timeline during the presentation today. So does anybody have any questions right now? So far, are we good? Yes.
On the site visits, are those actuals that are coming to our site? It's been a while since I've done this one.
That's a really good question. That is third on my list here. I'll talk about that when I get there. Great question. And probably evolving as we speak. Any questions from our Zoom audience? Not seeing anybody. Okay. RFP was open yesterday about 12:10 and sent out notice. It's probably why you're here or on Zoom. And basically the proposal forms are actually open in the system, and you could create those, but you can't do that. Like if you were to do that now, I would say, whoa, stop, because the first step in the process is you have to submit a letter of intent. If you receive a reply for United Way money, they use a similar process. The letter of intent is intended to make sure that you're proposing, that you're in an organization that's qualified, that you're proposing a program, and more particularly program services that are eligible services in the RFP. But it's also to establish kind of that suite of services that you provide, and we can hammer that out. And the reason that I do that, and I've stuck with it, is it saves us a tremendous amount of time during the proposal review process, from going back and making corrections, or worst case scenario is saying, hey, you weren't even eligible. You spent all this time and you don't have a financial audit. You can't apply. I've found it to be really useful. It's a super quick process. I mean, basically, if you're not already in the system and you're not already contracted or haven't been contracted recently, you just provide some basic org info, and then you just simply list the program name and then all the services that you provide in that program, and then indicate which of those you're going to be proposing. And then we kind of talk about that. I can usually turn those around in a matter of a few hours. Once in a while, we'll have a little back and forth and say, well, wait a minute, I thought you provided this, or that's not an eligible service, in the RFP. But it's a really quick and simple process. And I want to point out, it's here. It's the only Word document here. I just talked to IT. They don't like Word documents up. We used to do fillable PDFs, and for whatever reason, we just perpetually had issues with those. Anyway, it is a Word document. And so really the first step in the process is, if you're not familiar with our process, the first step is to read the guidelines and the RFP really carefully. If you are, then you would just download that RFP form and then save it and then email that to me. And those instructions are pretty clear in the RFP document. And then what I'll do is save that, look it over, communicate with you. And then once, what the next process is if we come to an accord, I'll send you what we call an approved letter of intent. And that should drive what you put in some of the proposal forms that we'll talk about. So do spend some time thinking about that. It's not as if there can't be some changes. There almost always are. But generally speaking, the services that you put in the letter of intent need to match what's proposed, both just in general for the program services, but also what's in particular what's being proposed to the city. Now, you have some flexibility. It's not like a lock, but we want it to be similar. Any questions about the letter of intent? The deadline to submit that, I've tried to give more and more time, is the 30th. That is a hard deadline. So if you don't submit a letter of intent by then, there is no next step in the process. That's a required part of the process. And our deadlines are fixed. I did inherit a process way back when where they were soft. And that was one thing that changed immediately. And the commission also feels really strongly that the deadlines are fixed. My suggestion is to do that letter of intent as soon as you can, because as soon as you do, then I'll say you have the green light to go in the system and create your proposal forms, and you can get to work. So it's a little bit of a bonus time for the agencies that get the letters of intent in fairly quickly, and then they've got a little more time to work on the proposal forms. Okay, so again, first step, download that letter of intent, save it, label it as indicated in the RFP, and then email that back to us, and then we'll talk about that. I have my old note in my notes here about last year we didn't do site visits. The commission really missed them. So we talked a lot about that this winter and spring. What we decided to do, and in part it was based on the success the United Way had with the virtual site visits, was to say we're going to do them, and if we need to, we'll do them virtually. I'm sure you can imagine that the commissions, really that's their main touch point on the ground with the applicants. So they really enjoy it. I think for the most part, the agencies enjoy it. I know it's a bit of a time commitment. We try to be really flexible about scheduling, try to schedule the time that works for you, but also hopefully they could see kind of the service provision in action. I can tell you as one of the managers here, I'm not super jazzed about in-person site visits at this point. So I am definitely leaning towards virtual right now. That seems to be, unless something drastically changes. But those will be here before you know it, like September. So what I will do is I will go ahead and start scheduling those as we have in the past. I'll try to get you guys, what'll happen is I'll send you an email and say, hey, send me some day. First, think about the days and the times where they could actually kind of observe the service. We'll kind of just approach it that way, as if it's going to be in person. And then let's pick some dates and times generally that you just can't do it. The broader, the better. Obviously, I'm trying to schedule 10 volunteers with their schedules. Usually it's not 10 people. It's usually, I try to have at least 2, but typically between 2 and 4 of the commissioners will do the visits. If we do virtual, obviously I'll be a part of it. I usually actually just stay out of it. I think it's a good chance of the commissioners to go out and do their thing and communicate with the providers. But if it's virtual, obviously I'll need to be there. So I can tell you right now that we're leaning towards virtual. But regardless, I'll be in touch with you back with our normal process. We'll communicate through email. That's a good chance to say almost all of our communication will be by email, except for the actual contract documents. That's pretty much the only thing we mail anymore. So we'll be working on those site visits. So what I do is I go ahead and work on the site visits based on the approved letters of intent. And that way, even if you weren't to submit a proposal, we've got them scheduled. If you don't submit, great, we'll just cancel that site visit. But it lets us, instead of waiting till September, it lets us get those on the books and start going right away after the proposal submission deadline. So actually look for those emails from me, in the next 2 weeks or so, somewhere in that range, once we get the letters. So probably next week, look for an email from me about the site visits. Let me show quickly here too. Site visits are scheduled from September 7th this year till October 11th. Obviously, it's just one site visit. If you propose more than one program, we usually try to submit those or schedule those kind of together. Aaron, I'm looking at Aaron because they have a situation, where they might have 2 programs. So in that case, when we had Money Smart, they might be at Blind Boom talking about that, and then they might go over to Oak Towers to visit there. So we do, if you have more than one program, we do try to schedule those kind of together because it's one organization, and they do want to hear about the organization as well. Go ahead.
I have a question. Virtual site visit sounds involved with one county, but it's just us sitting in our boardroom Zooming. Would this be more like walk around?
I don't know. I'd probably leave that up to you guys. If you wanted to do like a virtual tour or something, you probably could. I'm not going to require it. I mean, the other thing about the site visits is we already have situations, particularly like in mental health. They're not going to go sit and observe a mental health session, right? I will say it is a good way for the commissioners to see the environment in which the proposed services will be delivered. So if you have the ability to do that, I think it's engaging. I think it's helpful. I mean, think about it from our perspective. What basically part of it is like, hey, is this actually a place that we want to recommend City Council approve a contract at? I have had a situation in my career where we did a site visit and we said, we cannot contract for this. So it was actually a follow-up to a site visit the commission did, and then I returned and said, yeah, I agree, this is unacceptable conditions in which to contract services. So Aaron, I think if you have the wherewithal and the ability to do a little bit of a virtual too, I'm looking at Terry, because like room at the end, how are we going to do a site visit for room at the end? It's mostly just talking about the programs. And so it's already kind of a case-by-case basis. But if you had an after-school program, and we're not doing that in this RFP, it'd probably be pretty engaging to show the commissioners the environment, or a shelter if you had a facility, and you want to show them the bunk room versus the family room, or something like that. If you are providing mental health services, it's probably not super engaging to show them a bunch of private therapy rooms, but it can't hurt. I mean, just a quick scan. You can be creative too. You could always, and I'll talk about this more because we've not run into this, but you could pre-record and just, show them just a quick tour. So good question. Brave new world, new territory for us. Okay. So let's talk about Apricot. The RFP document is pretty much the only thing you're going to do outside of Apricot, which is our funding management system. I think most of you guys I know, and you've used it. If you get United Way funding, it's the system they use. And if you get county funding, either community health or children's services funding, it's the system we use. We share org profile, and we share the proposal forms and reports, for better or worse, hopefully for the better. I mean, the idea, honestly, is that a lot of the providers then only have to learn one system, one set of forms, upload your stuff in one place. CDBG does now use a separate system. Randy was with us initially, but their funding is so specifically guided by HUD that they use a separate system. But all that's to say, once you have an approved letter of intent, then you will be going into Apricot system. I'm going to scroll down here to the proposal submission subsection. You obviously need to be able to log into the system. If you're a new provider, so in other words, if you're not using Apricot for either the city, county, or United Way, then you'll need to email me as soon as possible, probably with your letter of intent, basically, and say, and I'll know too, probably, but hey, I'm not a user. I will create, you can't create, your profile. I'll have to do that for you, and then you'll have to populate that. So typically we would handle that through the letter of intent process for new users. If you're a returning user, I'm guessing most of you have that bookmarked. If not, the login's here. And then I did create new proposal submission instructions. I know the county whipped up some revised ones for that RFP they just issued for children's services funding. And then that one was a kind of a unique RFP, so they did a specific set of instructions. I updated the general instructions that the United Way, the city, and the county use, and those are uploaded here. They're also in Apricot in it's called My Shared Files now, so they're there, but they're also here. And what I did was I updated all the screenshots because the navigation changed a little bit in Apricot over the years. And then also the forms have changed. And then we added a little detail in there for the forms. So that is updated and it's there. If you see something, as you might imagine, we are really stretched thin. So I'd be the first to say that, I just do not have as much time this year the last 18 months to cross-check all of our work. So if you see something in the proposal submissions instructions, me, just let me know and we'll get it fixed. I mean, I want those to be helpful. We put quite a bit of time in it. And so I want it to be right. So if you see something, please let me know. And thanks for doing that. If you are a user, my experience is that it works better in Chrome. That's just my experience. I think it's probably these days, everything's so platform neutral, it's probably fine. I have in the past had people that are Mac users have some issues, but my guess is these days it's probably pretty cross compatible. I don't think that's as big a deal as when we started way back when. And then I guess I just can't say it often enough, and I have to do this too as I build forms, but save all the time. You know, it's summer, we're having some power outages once in a while with storms. Just saves, I know it's a pain, but save as much as you can. I will spend more time in the system after the break. So I'm not going to go into the details there. Any questions so far about Apricot? Don't see any in Zoom either. Okay. Just quickly on the proposals, they're pretty guided proposals. I mean, the questions are pretty specific. We did a lot of cleanup. We tried to just really narrow things down in these new forms, and we'll go over those. I'll try to highlight kind of some of the changes in our thinking behind some of those changes. I would just say, a couple things. It really is quality, not quantity. It's 10 volunteers reading it. This is basic needs, so there'll be a bunch of proposals. So just high quality. One of the things I've seen over the years, and I think it's just a societal thing, is because of text messaging and social media, but like I've seen like exclamation points and smiley faces like in proposals, and that's, I just, maybe I'm old school, but it's a government proposal. It's a part of the public record eventually. Just if you can, keep it very professional. We don't really like anecdotals and things like that. We're just really, in a lot of cases, just trying to understand what the service is, what measures used to measure performance, and quality. I just say, put yourself in the shoes of a reviewer, and they don't want like an emotional appeal, because it's a government process, and they want the information they need to have the assurance they need to make this recommendation to City Council to enter a governmental contract for the purchase of service. So I don't want to make it too dry, but I always say what we see in proposals is stuff nobody would ever put in a proposal to the city to build a road. And that's essentially what we're doing here. We're literally entering purchase of service agreements, no different than if we enter an agreement with an accounting firm or a law firm. That's how we see it. And I want to point out, it's also how we show council we're buying professional social services. This is not just nice charitable stuff we do. We are in the business of buying professional social services, basically to extend our capacity as a city to provide social services. Okay, so think about it that way. I hope that makes sense. I think the site visit is the opportunity to really add the kind of human side of things in your proposal. Keep it tight, keep it professional. I also want to say two things about citations. You'll notice in the new system, we really emphasize and use Boone Indicators dashboard. We have a lot of trouble with citations. I still see a lot of people citing a magazine article that cited the original source. If you're going to do that, go to the original source. Don't cite a newspaper. I do not want to see citations from newspapers and magazines. Go to the original source. But much of the data that you might need, which actually speaks to the local issue, should be in Boone Indicators dashboard. I do know that other areas that are very acceptable would be, say, publications or federal websites that indicate best practices or evidence of the effectiveness of the service or program strategy, but also, say, our homeless information. So it's certainly acceptable to cite the point in time count. Remember, I don't keep the point in time count, even though I conduct it. That is not my data. That data belongs to the Missouri Balance of State Continuum of Care. So that's your source, particularly for this RFP. So if possible, use Boone Indicators. You're certainly not limited to that, but we put a lot of effort into it. So it's easy to get to, easy to get the data, and also easy for the commissioners to go look it up, right? So it makes it easier for the reviewers as well. On August 31st at 5, the system will lock if the proposals aren't complete and submitted. You have to, every year I have somebody that did finish them and they didn't hit that submit proposal button. They need to be submitted. And that's that. If they're incomplete, then that's kind of that. And we've all done this. We're all grown-ups. We've all been in that boat, and just don't put yourself in that boat. I mean, I've been there. You know, we're a funder that's also a provider, so I write a lot of grants and things too. So to me, it all goes back to get your letter of intent in early so you can get approval and get the work. You know, knock the basics out. If you've done this before, get your org, make sure your org profile is up to date. Just, you know, basically sooner the better kind of thing. I usually, if somebody will submit a proposal early, I'll look it over. I have had opportunities to tell people, hey, you're missing this, and I was able to reopen it for them. If you do that on that Friday, I won't have time. But if you do it on a week before, I got plenty of time usually to say, hey, I gave it a quick scan. It's no guarantee, but I saw this, and you might want to address that. Any questions so far? Anything from our Zoom friends? Okay. What happens from there is that I'll make a quick summary of the proposals that were submitted. And you'll notice, and you've been through this before, in almost every step of the process, we'll put that in a PDF. It will go by email to the applicants, to the commission, and then post it on the website. So it will be, as we go through this process, these hyperlink or these bullets will become hyperlinks to the documents. So again, the first one is, I should back up, the approved letters of intent. Part of this process is our proposal, our contract renewal process. So in a separate process, folks will let me know if they want to renew their contracts. If they don't, then we would typically incorporate those funds into this RFP. So we'll post up and email out the approved letters of intent. Then the proposals we receive, like, I don't know anything about them. It's just, this is what was in the system as of 5:01 on the 31st. And then what I will do, this is a commission request several years ago, is for staff to review those for completeness. And the next step is for me to send another communication and post a list of the responsive proposals. If it's not responsive, we don't do like the public shaming thing and say it won't be on the list, but I will have communicated with you one-on-one and said, hey, your proposal wasn't complete. Like a good example would be you didn't have a required document in your org profile. Hint, hint. I mean, that's the first thing I'm looking at. I mean, it's so important, you know, before you hit that submit button, to take a gander at that org profile. You know, it could be that you missed a section on the proposal forms, and it's a good opportunity to point out, and this is really clear in the instructions, while there are required fields in the org profile and both proposal forms, all of the fields generally, not almost all of them are required, but it may not show up in the system as a required field because it may or may not be required for a particular situation. So there are some very basic required fields, but there are plenty of fields that are not, while technically required in the system. If it's blank, then it's going to be incomplete. Okay. Just a quick note about that. So then we will send that out, what proposals are responsive and which ones weren't. And then basically we will do a couple things. If you didn't submit a proposal or if it wasn't responsive, we'd obviously cancel that site visit. And again, we don't do the public shaming thing. It'll all be one-on-one. It will, then we will start reviewing the proposals, obviously, both staff and the commission. The site visits will be happening during the review. So obviously we're in close communication about those. and will probably be, I'm guessing at this point, probably virtual. So I'll probably be setting those up through Zoom. And then those happen during the review process. So as the commission reviews, staff review, we make notes. If you've been through this before, those typically would result in comments or questions to the applicants. We come together in October and go into closed session and talk about all those. They're supposed to come prepared with those. I come prepared with mine in a handy Word document. And then we convert those as needed to comments and questions that go out. And then those are emailed individually for response in a Word document. We've been thinking a lot about incorporating that in Apricot, and we probably will. In fact, I wanted to do that this time, but the little pandemic got in the way. So probably going to be in Word still this time. So that's just an easy back and forth. So I'll send you a Word document, and it'll be very specific. It'll say, here's a comment or question, here's the place for response, and here's the type of response. So it might be attach this, or just simply answer the question or provide clarification. It's if you've done it before, it's very specific. There's no ambiguity about what we want. There's a deadline for response. Again, if you don't meet that deadline, then, at any point where if you don't meet deadlines, like let's say it's, in fact, I think I went ahead and listed it in the timeline this year. It's going to be October 20th. It's a little bit of a, I'm sorry, that's for the winter shelter capacity. I was going to say that one's a little expedited. That's going to be the 25th. So we try to give about 10 days is what we usually try to give. And that way it crosses over at least 1 week in case somebody's out of town. And so go back to, and so those will go out to you through email individually, and then you'll respond. Sometimes, a lot of times it's just writing back in the Word document. Sometimes it's fixing something in your org profile that wasn't quite right. Things like that. And then we go into another closed session in November to form the preliminary recommendations. Based on those recommendations, then contracts well, we make the offer essentially. Some of those will have contingencies. So if there's an issue that was raised during the review and comment process, then we'll say, hey, we're making this preliminary recommendation, but you have to meet this contingency or agree to A, B, and C. And if those are satisfied, then those come back as partially executed agreements from you guys. Where applicable, you've agreed or fixed the contingencies. And then those go as final recommendations to City Council as partially executed agreements in a presentation. Again, back at the bottom of the RFP page, you can see where all of those steps take place. So from letters of intent to the proposals received to the responsive proposals, the preliminary contract recommendations, the contract recommendations, and then finally, if whatever's approved by council gets posted there, and then eventually gets moved over to our current contracts section. Any questions about that? Yes, sir.
Yeah. So since we have all the different foundation and funders in one database system, will it be clear precisely which documentation that is specific for this particular?
Yeah. Yeah, you'll have one org profile. And Charles, I think I didn't know that was you, by the way. We need to set you up because I don't think you're in our system, if I'm not mistaken. I think that was on my to-do list with you. You'll have one org profile, but when you apply for this RFP, you'll be clicking on a specific RFP, which will only open the forms that are specific to this. And while those forms are generic, you'll be, essentially putting that in a package that is this RFP. So for the agency that have applied before, I'm looking at the Housing Authority just because you have multiple programs. They've got 25 probably what we call proposal cover sheet document folders with each RFP's documents. So good question, Charles. And all of that is covered step by step in those guidelines. And one of the things we updated in the guidelines is how you navigate that is actually a little different than in the old system. And so we've got that, I think, clarified. Charles, does that answer your question? Okay, great. Yeah, because if you're in there, like some of you guys might actually be applying for our RFP and that children's services one that's open, right now. So you are going to have to pay attention once you create your proposal for us and them, that you're picking the right one to go in and work on. Because you could kind of get confused if you're not paying attention, because the proposal forms are identical. It's just they're in separate, I guess what we call folders in the system, if that makes sense. Contracts. I want to touch base. I talked a little bit about the contracts. All of this is covered in those social services funding guidelines. So really, like even Charles, even though we just did a contract because you guys didn't apply through our normal process, be a really good idea if you haven't gone through this process to take a look at those. And one of those sections are the contracting requirements. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that today. I'll just, again, emphasize that it is purchase of service. You do have to meet some requirements like work authorization, participation. That usually doesn't hang people up too much anymore. But I want to point out one thing. The law department has asked that we incorporate a HIPAA business associate agreement where applicable. And because we issued mental health services in this RFP, if you plan to apply for mental health services, we will almost assuredly need to enter a business associate agreement with the provider for HIPAA. That is here as one of the amendments or appendices to the RFP. So that is actually new. I'll also point out that the standard social services provider agreement is one of the appendices. It's E this year. And one thing I will talk about more later is the taxonomy and the outcomes that they're here. One thing I failed to mention was the grading criteria that the commission uses is posted here so you can see it. Like, we're super transparent. You can see everything. It has changed a little bit with the proposal forms, by the way. So it might not hurt to look at it. I failed to point out that we don't use force ranking because we're true to the RFP process. So it isn't like if you get a score, this is hypothetical, 50, and another provider with the same service gets a 45, that we fund one or the other. Columbia is still generally small enough that it may be unique. I'll go ahead and choose Ratty and Sal Army. Sal Army Harbor House is a very different shelter than Ratty. There's a little bit of overlap, but we're not probably going to be in a situation where we say, oh, one of them got a higher score than the other, we're funding that shelter. So the ratings really serve as a way for the commission to kind of focus their attention and get a feel. And it informs the conversation when it comes to the preliminary recs work session, but so do the site visits. So does prior experience with the provider. So does just the current environment of what we need and things like that. So it is one of the factors that's considered, but it's not like some of the federal grants we apply for where you come out, but it's also really different. Like, it's not an RFP just for one service. So we're going to be considering anything in this RFP from one-on-one individual counseling to a sheltered bed night. And just so in that way, you're not going to force rank. It's really becomes more of an issue of what's the quality of the proposal, what's the quality of the program, but also what do we need? And then also it's a small local community where we're trying to help out more and more. This funding is so important to help people match for other money. So there's that factor too, that there is some of this notion that you see that we do like to try to fund as many high quality programs as we can to try to make sure those services are available. So I think that's all I've got for this first part, and we're actually right on time, which is good.
The business associates agreement, that's for everybody, correct? Not just mental health.
I don't think so. The attorney kind of wants to handle it on a case-by-case basis. I just mentioned mental health because that one's pretty clear. And we don't contract for a lot of medical services because we're actually a medical provider here. That would be another pretty clear one. There may be other circumstances where people are collecting health information, personal health information. We may need it.
So you'll just let us know.
We'll just let you know. Yeah. And I'll be working on that essentially once I'll probably be thinking about it too during the letters of intent, and I'll probably start communicating with her right away and just saying, hey, here's kind of the ones I'm seeing that might have a service or one or more services that it's going to be collecting personally identifiable medical information. My guess is the agencies or providers to which this will apply are accustomed to doing those. And Jessica, I don't know if that includes you or not, but I think SIL might be one of those that could be in that. Yeah. So, and then we're going to get into some probably gray areas too around, are you, say, doing street outreach and you're talking to people about their mental health history? It's probably going to gravitate to that area. We'll handle that on a case-by-case basis. Any other questions? And again, next step is we'll just take a quick break. I'm going to go pretty quickly today, but we'll go into the actual system, and I'm going to show you basically quickly how to create a proposal, and then I've got a test proposal in there. We're going to kind of go through that. Any questions though about really to this point, either kind of the process and or the rules or the requirements? Any questions in that area? Anything from our Zoom friends? Oh, in the chat. Here, let me establish. Okay. Nope, James. Okay, so let's take a break. For our friends on Zoom, we're going to break let's take a 5-minute break. So we'll resume at 11:05. I'll email James. Fired back up. For our Zoom friends, we're gonna restart here. Letting everybody in the room kind of regroup and get their seats, and we're gonna get going. All right, so I'm gonna start here. Share my screen again. Start here. Let's go back to that web page. If you haven't used Apricot, you're going to have contacted me through the letter of intent process, and we're going to set up an org profile. I'm obviously probably going to send you a link at that point. But I do want to remind folks that the logon page link is always here on our social services funding page. Also, the county has it. Also, United Way has it. But anyway, we're gonna go to Apricot. I don't actually know what your login screen looks like, but it probably looks similar to that. And I'm gonna log in. My view is gonna look different than yours. And lovely little pop-ups. I'm gonna log in as our test case. There it is. See the slider. I'm going to log in so it looks like what you guys would see. Does that kind of look like what you guys typically see? It should. So you've got search records, my Apricot tools, and grants. You're in, and let's just assume that you've logged in, and this is what you see. Remember those proposal submission instructions just really walk you straight through this. I'm probably not going to spend a lot of time on all the navigation features because those are so clear in the submission instructions. But assuming that you already have an org profile, and this is kind of how we handle it in the system. I personally think just going in and doing your org profile. If you're brand new, then that's kind of a must, because for one thing, it's an exercise in making sure that you can comply. I mean, we may have thought you could through the letter of intent process, but I only know so much. The rubber really hits the road, particularly for new users. If you open that org profile, and to do that, I think you guys know how to do this, but it's under the search records. And then you're only going to get one profile. It's yours. And then you go into the profile. And if you're new and you start going through this and you're like, I don't have that, or I don't have this, then you can email me. But generally it's going to be either you can get it by the deadline or not. So that's probably an excellent first step. There are a couple ways, but for new proposals, you guys know if you've used this system before, you can easily get to your proposal cover sheets that you've submitted. I've got job point. So this is our city county test org. And so you can see the proposals that have been submitted before. Obviously, these are all test cases. And I think for returning users, that once you create a proposal, you can use this feature to get to that. But the way for everyone to create a new proposal is to go to the application overview section under grants. It's now called grants. We don't love that, but there's nothing we can do about it. And then you will see also, just generally all the applications that you have open or have closed. I got to work on this because in the old days we couldn't move these around, but the county got theirs to the top. So ours is actually the bottom. I'll talk to Kristen and see how she did that and try to move ours up towards the top. But if you, this is really important. So, you go to grants, you go to application overview, and right now, at least, our RFP is RFP FY2022 social services. I think almost everybody's used Apricot, but for our new users, this is critically important because there is another RFP here that's open that you could apply for, but it's not ours. This is the one that's Children's Services Fund Identified Youth Needs. And you could click here and looks like those guys created a test case under it. So they have a proposal started under our city county test org. But ours is actually down here. And you guys can see that I've created one proposal, but real quickly, you can submit more than one proposal. So I'm looking at Aaron, and Aaron traditionally would be submitting more than one. And you need to do this process, and this is in the instructions, while you have one org profile, as you guys know. If you have more than one program proposal, you've got to do this process. So I've got one in here. Let's just do a little quick exercise. Man, pop-ups are nuts. That we're going to create another one because I've got two program proposals I want to submit. It opens the proposal cover sheet. This is kind of old hat for most of you guys. If you hear a few things I say today, let's say the top 3 things I say today, here's number 1. You've got to select the right fund source for this RFP. I know this is not great. I wish it auto-populated because you click that. Something we've talked to Social Solutions about extensively, that if you click on that grant, why wouldn't it just auto-populate that? Erica, yeah.
So are you saying for this?
Yes, by program. So the way everything should be submitted is by program, and that's all negotiated through the letter of intent process. So if I see a letter of intent, I'm like, hey man, you got really, this is 4 programs. You need to submit 4 proposals. Now each program has at least 1 or more services. And within those services, you may only be pitching 1 or 2 of those, say 10 services to us to buy, but we want to see the whole program. So we'll talk about that. But if you're going to submit two proposals by program, then you'll do this process. So yeah, you might have two proposals and they're handled differently. So, we might fund one and not the other. Now, if your organization is not qualified, then we wouldn't consider any, if that makes sense. So that's step 1, is your org able to meet the qualifications? Yes.
Is the FY2022
Nope, it's all in the same RFP. Yep, good question, Terry. And you might actually be submitting, we'll talk about that if anybody wants to go for that one. I'll probably have you do a separate proposal. I hate to do that, but it keeps it clean because then your standard services would be covered in the renewal period, whereas this will not. So we'll probably have you do a separate proposal if anybody wants to do that. So in all cases, if you want to apply in response to this RFP, this weird little step that is so critical is that you hit this FY22 social services in that drop down. That has a little form logic that pops up some city stuff. In this RFP, it typically is going to be year round. I don't have a winter one. This is kind of rooted in our old summer and school year programming. If somebody applies to that winter shelter capacity, just put school year or something. It's fine. I'm not going to worry about it because it's pretty self-explanatory. But you would put the name of the program here in this case. So let's say CERC is applying, the name of the program is room at the end. CERC's the org and the program's room at the end. And those are required fields. Those are some of those required fields that I mentioned are system required fields, but even if you save this record and it shows on the right side, let's say 2, and oh, by the way, you need to select basic needs. I almost forgot. So there's 2 key steps in this proposal cover sheet. One is to select basic needs. And the other is that RFP here, funding cycle. I'm just going to pick year round. We've got one more required field. I'm going to do this just to show folks quickly that all right. This is a great example. I don't know if you guys can see here. Show you, yeah, there we go. Now, if over here you guys see that it has all the required field checks, right? Does anybody think this cover sheet's complete? All right, so this is just a really good example of, even though that these required fields show checked, it's just the system required fields because we have to have a minimum number for apricot forms. So, you know, we're missing the website, we're missing all kinds of things. In the proposal. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So you've created your proposal cover sheet. Basically, let's say you log out because you went to go do something, right? And now you have two ways to get to that proposal cover sheet. You can actually just go in your, because you've already created one, so it'll be here somewhere. List right here, right? So you can go in that way and it takes you straight in the cover sheet document folder, or you can go back to this application overview and then find your proposals. And you guys remember I had one there before, now I've got two, and then you just click on either of those. And I'm going to pick this one. And that navigates you not into the cover sheet. If you want to get back to the cover sheet, you know, you're in your, what they call the proposal cover sheet document folder. I always think of that as like your hanging file folder in the sky. And then you got your forms in that. And basically, you know, again, if we wanted to go into that cover sheet and make some changes, we can do that. We're moving slow today. And then if we want to get out of that, we go back to view folder. Again, this is all really carefully covered in the instructions. Now, that other one, I've already created forms, but let's go ahead and create our forms. You just simply hover. I'm trying to hustle, guys, so bear with me. I would ask generally, like on the navigation questions, to hold off on those because you're not looking at the instructions. Look at those. If you're looking at those and then you have questions, just email them. But what I want to focus today on is the contents of the forms real quickly, particularly because we've got some changes. But just quickly, we're going to create a new form. And there are required fields here. You can save this record. And I'm going to do that quickly just so I can show you that the required field checks are not met, but we're still able to create the form. And so now you can see it here that it's been created. And I'll create the other one in a moment. If you guys don't mind, I'd like to just jump into the form content form by form, if that's okay. I'm not going to spend any time on the org profile because it really has not changed. Again, if you have questions, step one, I think, is to make sure you've looked at the guidelines and the instructions. And then if you still have questions about contents or navigation, let me know. I do draw kind of a line on answering questions for folks, but if it's just simply kind of what are you trying to get here, the spirit of the question or the field, then just let me know. Those of you who know me, I handle all that through email. Don't call me. I've been burned way too many times by that over the years. I am a stickler, as you guys know, for emailing. We are a governmental entity, and I am very much a stickler for email communication. So, you know, look through the instructions, look through the guidelines. If it still doesn't make sense, shoot me an email. All right, so we're in the program overview form. It's still called has anybody worked on the Children's Services Fund proposal, the current one? All right, so they're using these forms too. United Way is going to be using them. they're going to be issuing here, I think, soon. This is still called the program overview form, but it did change a bit. There's a change here at the top with a big emphasis on the statement of the issue using Boone indicators. But these questions did change a bit. So if you're efficient like me and you sometimes copy and paste from other RFPs, be careful because this did change this top section. I mean, this question, basically, what are you working on? I mean, I am surprised sometimes what I see here. It really is a key way to start your proposal, because if the reviewer doesn't understand the problem you're trying to fix, that's not a great start, right? If it's not clear to the reviewer, what is it you're trying to work on? And we give some examples here. Is it homelessness? Is it child abuse? The other thing I see is sometimes it's like way too specific, and there are places for that. What you're really trying to do here is state the community level issue and then back it up with hopefully documentation from Boone indicators, right? And you can see from our perspective, that helps us tell that story to our stakeholders. I would say the program goal hasn't changed too much, but this section was collapsed. The goal and then the detailed description are in the same section now. And then there's another question that addresses how the proposed program will advance equity in our community. Now, equity is a broad category. It could be gender, disability-based, race-based, any of those disparities that we see. So like, let's say I'm pitching for my home visiting program. One of the key disparities I'm going to be talking about there is the glaring and awful disparity in birth outcomes for people of color as compared to their white peers. So just an example from our programming. So it's a pretty broad section. I kind of advocated to break that into two sections, but you do go from the goal to a really detailed description of the program, and then how it will advance equity in our community. Okay, so that's a kind of a biggie section. And I want to say too, in that detailed description, we are not asking for detail about services anymore that you're not proposing to the city to purchase. Same with the county. I think the same with United Way. So here's your chance to really talk about those, because we're not going to learn much about them like we used to in that old program service form. So it would be really good to give a pretty detailed description of what those other services are. Well, the ones you're proposing, obviously, but the other ones too. The thing I typically see missing in this section is how it all ties together. Sometimes I just see a list of services, but it doesn't leave you with kind of a sense of how they all work together to achieve those program outcomes. So when you fill this out, I would keep your logic model. So the exciting news is we have back to one logic model, not every service. Hip, hip, hooray. I don't know if anybody else is excited about that, but I am. And so I would think about kind of your logic model as you answer this question, and it should be almost in a lot of ways kind of a narrative of your logic model and how it all ties together and how they're attributable to those outcomes. Don't waste your space there on like hours and days and stuff, because we have a separate question about that in program access. And then this question does stump people a little bit. This is, do you have program level eligibility? In the services, there's an area to talk about service eligibility. So, you could have a program that everything's on a fee scale, but generally all of our programs have some sort of eligibility guideline, right? Terry, your program, I mean, at the most basic, they need to be basically literally homeless. It's pretty basic, right? Whereas I run programs that have an extensive list of eligibility. You have to live in Columbia under 200% of poverty level, have kids or be older, things like that. That's where you need to talk about that. And then just, you guys have used this before, most of you, there are form logic, where if you say they'll be charged a fee, then you need to upload the fee scale here. I can tell you for the city, if you say you charge a fee and you don't have a sliding fee scale, that's going to be a huge issue for us. Like we want to see, my tip is, I want to see what you would hand a consumer. And if it doesn't make sense to me, how is that going to make sense to a consumer who may have a low literacy level? Give us what you make public and make sure it ties to those services generally. Now, if you're an after school program, it's not usually tied to all those little program services. It's usually we have a after school program and we have a fee. There are definitely cases like particularly a mental health program where the program might be outpatient mental health program. There may not be a fee scale for the program. It's going to be a service fee. So we'd want to see that here, and you'll probably also need to upload that for the services. I hope that makes sense. But I'm trying to cover the things that people tend to get hung up on. But I will say this quickly: if you uploaded a fee in the other form, a fee scale, and you said you had a fee, you probably need something here, right? If that makes sense. I mean, it's probably going to be. If you have a fee scale, it probably is going to need to be in both places. Yes.
You use the word consumer versus client.
We use consumer for better or worse. It was kind of trending for a while, and you know how things go. Now I think participant is more popular, but yeah. So yeah, you'll see consumers here. Okay, and Charles, you can see that actually right here. This section is actually called program consumers. So again, who are you going to serve in the program? Now up here, you've talked about, this is a kind of an issue I see too. This is just generally, I'm working on homelessness and here's the numbers generally, right? Like here's what homelessness looks like. And in this case, as much as possible, you want to talk about Columbia because you're pitching to the city of Columbia. Here, we're talking about your people you're going to serve, right? So let's keep running with homelessness. We know that there's a huge variety of types of homelessness here. But let's say in this particular case, we're running a shelter for unsheltered chronically homeless folks. That's where you're really going to start talking about the population you propose to serve. It's an incredibly important section because this is what we're trying to consider as to whether or not we should buy this, right? So if let's say the city thinks that chronic homelessness is something we should focus on, but you're serving veterans, we need to know that, because it helps inform our allocation decisions. Yes, sir.
Does all the boxes, will you review all of the boxes going with the grant for?
Oh yeah.
Right. I know sometimes you don't enter in some RFPs when they're systematic. If you don't enter information, Dropbox doesn't open, so you know it's there.
Yep. I know exactly what you mean. We don't have anything like SurveyMonkey or whatever where you kind of move on and back and forth. All these are viewable at any time. I do, Charles, you prompt me to think this little magic button, save, because it is a web-based system. So if you could have power, but you lost your connection and you didn't know it. That's happened to all of us. Man, I'm kind of anal that way. I'm probably hit and save every time. I will tell you guys though, we did create these forms in Word. What I would do is do them in Word, and then I'd cut and paste into here. It's much easier to edit. I'll show you guys where those are. We got a little time. Hustle here, guys. So basically, okay, you told us who you're going to serve, and then you need to tell us why. And then are there any impediments to serving those folks? So let's say our chronically homeless folks, like you might say, well, they're extremely difficult to reach. And so we will work with the street outreach team to make sure that folks are aware our service is available. I advocated to keep this in. My commission really likes this in the section that we're program consumers. And basically just a simple question is, in this program you're proposing, how many total people you're going to serve, right? And then that gives us a calculation. I want to point out that this calculation takes this number and divides it into the total program expenses. So if you've used this before, you know that that won't calculate until you go down and complete the budget. Once that's completed and the next time you hit save, it'll make that calc. But as you do this, they kind of wanted to move it. And I said that it just makes so much sense to have it in the program consumer section. Can we keep it here? The other thing I would note that I see all the time is that number of individuals doesn't match these totals. So I'm going to move into the demographics part of program consumers. All the time I see that, okay, you said, I don't know, let's just say 200 here. And then this is 180, you know, this one's 200. That's usually how it goes. It's pretty straightforward. Like if you say you're going to serve X number of people, that ought to be consistent across all those categories, but it is an issue we see every year. The other quick thing I want to point out, yeah, I say this every year, and I kind of get it, but everybody lives in Columbia, lives in Boone County, right? So it's over here for a reason. So if you say that you're going to serve 100 Boone County people, right? That includes everybody in Columbia. So let's say I'm serving 90 people, right, that live in Columbia, and I'm serving 10 that live outside the city limits, but in Boone County, right? So I'm serving 90 people in Columbia, and let's just say 10 people in Ashland. What would you put here? 100, yeah, exactly. Now this calc only adds this up, so that trips people up too. And usually the issue is that they put 10 here and 90 here, and they email and say, hey, I'm serving way more than that, it won't calculate it. And so that's because this should be 100. And I can quickly see from my perspective, I don't need to know the other county people. It's just simple. Okay, I see that you're serving 90, and that means you're serving 10 if they're outside of Columbia. Let's see. Demographics, pretty straightforward, I think. I do realize that the notion of race has changed a lot in my career, and it continues to evolve. Pretty much stuck with the Census Bureau's take on it. For better or worse, I haven't really seen the multiple races grow, so we moved that up the list. And it is listed by what we typically see in Boone County as far as the predominance of race, which is the recommended way to handle proposal forms. Just read another article about that. Ethnicity is different than race. So if on your intakes, you need to be asking race, but you also need to be asking, in this case, it's for us, for the city and county, specifically about ethnicity. And what we're looking at is Hispanic or Latino. So you can be white, but you can be Hispanic or not Hispanic. So if you're not doing that, if you're new to us, you need to add that to your intake questions. I realize there are a lot of other ethnicities, but we're just trying to capture some of this is just, that's really the only ethnicity in the census data where there's enough data to not have a massive margin of error. So that's the rationale there. Gender, we did add other. I also realized there are more modern terms and more modern ways to handle this. The problem we have, especially with shared forms and also making these forms last without having to update constantly, is trying to come up with compromises. We feel like this is a reasonable compromise still at this time, just to have male, female, other. I also realize male and female is really sex, not gender. But because we serve across the age span, we just get into some really tough terminology choices, or it's just too expansive. So as somebody who works a lot in this area of diversity and inclusion, I'll ask for a little forgiveness and not being quite as perhaps modern in our language, but I think you can understand the challenges we have of trying to keep up. Well, we like here as a service provider, we are encountering more and more people that don't identify as having a gender. So yeah, so we have male, female, and other. I think in modern parlance, it really ought to be probably man, woman, you know, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. So basically, if you have folks that don't identify as one of the traditional genders, they'd be captured typically as other. I know that's how we've been capturing our data. The reason I point this out, particularly for anybody new, is if you're going to get this money, you've got to have a system that can capture these things. So I am spending a little time here. I want to point out that we're at 200% of poverty level. This is critical because the city funding can only go to people who live in Columbia in households with incomes at or below 200% of poverty level. Now you can serve other folks, but the city contracted funds can only go to those folks. And so, one of those things we're going to look at is if you say you're going to serve 200 people, right? And the city fund represents a good chunk of that proposal, but only 10 of those 200 under 200%. And I see this once in a while, we're immediately going to have red flags like, whoa, where's that? That's probably not going to work. So I also want to quickly point out, and I actually sent some of our new public assistance contracts this link, and I'm going to start doing that. If you're not using the city viewer map on the city website to identify whether they live in the city, and I hate to be a stickler, but this is purely City of Columbia general revenue money. They have to live in the City of Columbia. Just because you have a Columbia address does not mean you live in Columbia. In fact, we now have more and more islands that are actually, so I'm sad to say that if you live in some of those little islands, you cannot use city funds to serve those people. It's just, because where would we draw the line, right? I mean, it's impossible. So you need to use that city viewer map. And if you're not doing that, your staff you probably need to go back today and say, hey, we need to be doing the city viewer map. It's super simple. You just put the address in and they can see visually if it's in the city limits. It's very easy to use. Okay. Age, this is form logic. So you just see the city's simple age. The United Ways is a little different. And then the county uses this one for community health funding, but they use a much more complex one for children's services funding. So I just want to note that keep in mind, if you're either accessing or planning to access funding, you might want to, especially if you're building a new program or you're kind of new to Columbia, you might want to reach out to the United Way in the county to make sure that what you're tracking also meets their needs, because I can tell you this won't. So if you set up your system to track age for the city, it's not complex enough to meet your requirements for the county. And I don't know about you guys, but if I build a new program, I don't want to redo things. So something to think about. Oh, you can see it here. That actually should not be popping up. I'm glad I saw that. Oh, Kristen and I need to fix that. That's what's happening there, you guys, is when you picked the city funding as part of creating the proposal, responding to that, clicking to open that RFP, it should be hiding that. So we'll need to get that fixed. So I'll fix that today. So it shouldn't affect anybody because it'll be fixed by the time you start proposing. But a little peek at the sausage making. Program quality is, I think, pretty similar. Basically, their external requirements. So do you have to be licensed, or are there minimum standards for your program? And I know some people in the room have that and some people don't. And then this is pretty straightforward. Are you accredited? If you are, then it's going to pop up some information about that accreditation. Now remember, this is the program. So we have agencies, and that's in the org profile. So if your agency or your org is accredited, that's different. And if your program's not specifically accredited, then you don't put anything here. So like, you may be, well, a great example, we're an accredited public health department, right? Nationally accredited. That would have been in our org profile, or it is actually, because we applied through the system. Whereas I've got programs that aren't necessarily accredited. I also have like our home visiting program is accredited. So in that case, in the org profile, our national public health accreditation would be in the org profile. And if I'm applying for home visiting here, then my home visiting accreditation is here, okay? That I'm pointing that out because we do see some issues in that area. Okay, this is probably, we thought about getting rid of this because this causes the most kind of questions. If you say no, that's it. We did drop the why not. If you say yes, please cite those, and then those citations should be down below. Like, if you're saying you're using best practices, then that means somebody else said their best practices or standards, and you need to cite them. That's a common issue I see. So it's just kind of, it makes sense, but by its very nature, it has to be citable if you're saying that there's, because you can't make up your own best practices. They have to be, vetted by other folks. Is there evidence? And that's different than best practices and standards, right? So if you're running an after-school program, there are national after-school program guidelines and best practices. You might cite those. If you're running a home visiting program, there are most certainly, best practices and standards. Mental health is a great example for standards. That's different than evidence, right? So, and that's evidence of the effective program per se. So think about that too. So basically, are you running a program that has been proven to be evidence-based? If so, cool. I mean, a lot of us are. And also I've got programs that there's no evidence. That's fine. I don't know of any evidence for the effectiveness of a utility assistance program, for let's say, whereas our HFA home visiting program isn't recognized as an evidence-based program. I would simply find the citation to that evidence and I would put it there. And I hope that makes sense. Quality improvement process, kind of thought about taking this out, decided to leave it in. Basically, we think it's important. I mean, do you use, PDCA, like Plan, Do, Check, Act? Do you, what I see a lot is not people that understand the concept of quality improvement, but there's not an actual process in place. And you know what? It's not great, but it's fine. I'd rather just have folks say, we don't really have a formal quality improvement process. So here, we have a whole protocol, we have a quality improvement team, we have ways that you document it, and then we have, a whole Plan, Do, Check, Act system where you document it. That's a quality improvement process, but we're also a 100-person public health department. I don't expect all small nonprofits to have it. It's just one of those things that some of our bigger agencies may have a formal quality improvement process. But the key word in there is measurably improve. So in other words, you have a system where you document and measure the improvements that were made or not made based on the changes that you implemented, right? So if you have a system, talk about it. If you don't, you can just say, we don't have a formal system. We do collect consumer feedback, what have you. Okay, program partnerships and collaborations. We try to simplify this a little bit. The first one, though, is about the partnerships that you have to address the community level solution. And that's going to be, as indicated in the statement of issue, be addressed. So let's go back to our homelessness example. If you're working on homelessness, what I would put here is we participate actively in the Functional Zero Task Force. That is a partnership and collaboration that's trying to address the big issue. Another example, though, down below, this is more specific to the program. So let's say that we have a partnership. I'll use an example again from our program, where for our home visiting program, we specifically partner with First Chance so that we don't have to buy cribs. We deliver their cribs for them and do the education, and they provide the crib for us in exchange. That's a program level collaboration. Okay, so one is, are you in any collaborations to address the issue or issues that you said the program addresses in the community? And the other, what are specific collaborations at the program level? Now, one of the things that we only want to see here are formal MOUs and contracts, right? So I do actually have an MOU with First Chance, so I would upload that, right? That's a good example. I don't want to see a letter of support here. That's not what this is. This is an MOU is actually a form of an agreement. No, we have 3 here. So if you start running out of space, you're going to need to combine them probably into one. So if it were me, you might go in and create a PDF with 6 of them and just make sure they're clearly labeled. Okay. Program personnel. This basically, I kind of lobbied for this to be below, but all this stuff's kind of a group process. So basically you're going to describe each position down here. I kind of like to see, and let me talk about this first. You're going to list all the program personnel. Now, this is not all your agency personnel. It's anybody that works in the program, right? The one thing I see missing a lot, especially from small orgs, is like the executive director or the director of finance tends to, I mean, all those folks in those small orgs tend to be, now they're not going to be 1.0 FTE. I think all of us at this point probably understand at least the idea that you might be a full-time employee, but you assign your time. Now, for big programs, an executive director probably isn't working much on that program. They're not necessarily assigning their time to the program. But even in my job, 10% of my time is assigned to our direct social services. And we actually track that because I'm answering questions if my supervisor is not here, and I'm making program decisions and things like that. So something to think about. Only you know that. I don't know it. I just have a feel that having worked with a lot of you guys, sometimes what I see missing are people that clearly work on the program. You're not at small agencies, the ED or higher level folks are not only doing administrative work and fundraising. They're often writing grants and things like that, or writing reports or answering program questions. So it's something to think about. What I would generally say is that ought to be built into that ought to be baked into your operations. You already kind of know that. I can't answer that for you. But what I generally see is stuff missing. I rarely see people over include. I usually see people not putting enough in there. Yeah. Yeah, so in your case, since they're seasonal, just use that 2080 hour formula and they convert to FTEs that way. And then we want this. Yes, yeah, sorry, good question, Terry. It's the position, not the person. In the org profile, it's actually the top 5 actual persons. This is a little different. This is the position. So yeah, if you have run a mental health clinic and you have 8 full-time therapists, you put therapist here in line 1, their qualifications, and then you put 8.0 right here, or 7.75 if you have somebody 3/4 time. Now, then what you're going to do is to kind of describe how they fit in the program. So we don't need a big essay here, but generally it's going to be pretty self-explanatory, but not always. Sometimes there's a position in there. It's really important for us to understand how they contribute. This, just so you guys know from behind the scenes, what we're really looking at there is a couple things. One is, okay, do you have the right personnel and the right level of personnel to deliver the services? The other thing that's a little more nuanced is how does that match up to your personnel expenses? That's something I see a lot. Like, you said you had on one extreme, let's say you had 12 employees that are full-time, and I know what minimum wages in Missouri, and then you say your personnel budget's $40,000. I see that all the time, believe it or not. So I'm just again trying to share things that we see from a reviewer perspective. Make sure
this applies to this project.
The program that you're proposing, what of your employees, what % of their FTE by position is contributed to that program. If you're like most of us, you're assigned across multiple programs. The budget has not changed actually. So the direct support steps up. These percents count themselves. Make sure that you put a narrative in here. The county's kind of bigger on that than I am. Like I'm not a big stickler. Like if you'd say it's United Way, I don't really know what else there is to say about it, but generally we like some text in there. I'd say here's where it's really important. Like if you're getting a grant, a great example here locally is if it's like VU, I'd love to know that here. Like, let's say you put $100,000 here. What I'd love to see is Veterans United Foundation 50 and I don't know, Boone Electric Foundation 10 or you know what I mean, something like that. There are definitely fields here where it's going to make more sense to have a narrative. I'm not a big stickler on it, but just use your common sense that if it's a more of a broad category, you know, just use your best judgment. I mean, again, I can just go back to what's the story you want to tell the reviewers. The more information that's concise, frankly, the better. All these are so specific. They're very straightforward. Just quickly, whatever amount you're proposing, and I'm just amazed every year I see this, it's got to be right here. Like, so you're applying to the city for social services funding. If the budget that you propose does not have the amount that you're proposing, that's, I think, probably the most common reason we say proposals are not responsive. And that's it. I have had a proposal that failed to put that amount in, and I hate it, but it was considered unresponsive. It was otherwise pretty complete. I mean, if you don't bother to put the money you're asking for in your proposed budget, as small a thing as that may seem, it's really a sign to us that it was not, I don't know what it's a sign of, it's just clear it was not complete. Proposed in this case, almost all of this information is going to be proposed. In fact, all of it in the new proposal forms is proposed. Okay. So the proposed period in this case is January 1, 2022, believe it or not, to December 31. So this is a best guess.
But this would be as it applies to this program.
This program for 22.
Okay.
It's a best guess in almost all cases, whether it's demographics or whatever. Most of the programs are existing and not new, so you have good historical information to make your best guess on. But yes, good question. This is all proposed for 22. No, because it's two different programs. Yep. So yeah, best guess here, educated guess. These revenues add up. And the expenses, we used to have this huge chart of accounts. I don't think anybody's here been around that long, maybe Jessica. We used to be a massive expense chart of accounts, and we went to just collapsing it into personnel and non-personnel. And that just gives us an idea of, you know, those two kind of areas. And again, do those personnel expenses match up to the what you said or what we think the program personnel should require? Here, we changed this question a little bit, made it more specific, and just generally talk about what efforts you've made to pursue other funding. I mean, generally, to my mind, I'll just be honest, it's not my favorite question because it ought to be clear in your budget because it's a proposed budget. It's not current. Yeah, to me, this question would make more sense if we were saying, what's your current budget? You know, and then you'd say, and by the way, we're going to pursue this. To me, this proposed budget is your aspirational budget. Right. Now, I do think it's a case to say, or an opportunity to say, hey, we're not getting United Way funding now, but we plan to apply. Remember, like in the case of in the old days with United Way, where their RFPs were not aligned with ours, you had to kind of cross over their years. So that's another thing we did intentionally. We're really trying to align the three funders' years. It doesn't work well for me as a city, by the way. Our fiscal year is October 1. So doing things on the calendar year is really hard, but we keep doing it to try to make it easy on the providers and keep things consistent. Basically, I think it's your chance to talk about the proposed budget, you know, what you've done, what might be changing, what new funding you're pursuing. But that ought to be generally reflected in that proposed budget. The references, please, as best you can, use APA as much as possible. Hopefully you're referencing Boone indicators and we're okay with that. We know it's not necessarily the primary data source, but we own it and we can go to it and see it. And we have added some citation information to Boone indicators as well. To make that easier. We're running really tight on time. So any questions here? And then I'm going to open the other form. Okay. All right, let's create this form real quick. This now is called program outcomes and services. That used to be program services form. Huge changes here. One logic model instead of a logic model for each program service. Going back to the old days, which I think is great because I don't know about you guys, but I don't build my logic models around services. I build them around programs. The idea is that usually your services, you can have multiple services contributing to an outcome. I think this will make it much easier to collect and use that information from you guys. But the big change, again, here's a link to the Boone Impact Group website where you can get the documents. But you're going to need to use that taxonomy of services. That, in our case, is in the RFP. We actually say what the services are you have to choose from. So that's pretty straightforward. But the new thing is that you'll have to choose from the common outcomes. You guys, I think all of you guys were part of those conversations. We've got some instructions here with the definitions already built in. But this is the new logic model, and it is a little different. It's a single logic model. And what it does is it calls for the outcome. That percent applies to the indicator. This is a little tricky for us to handle. The reason it's separate is we can then run reports. I know that's a little wonky. If you can, or not if you can, please just enter a number here. Don't put the percent in because it screws up the reporting when it kicks out. So the outcome is, let's say, achieve housing stability within, achieve and maintain housing stability for 90 days. And we say that 90% of the program participants are going to meet that. So you put a 9-0 there. And here you would say, program participants achieve housing stability, whatever your indicator is. Method of measurement, let's say it's a survey. And what's different out here, besides this separate number, is what services contribute to that. Okay, so let's say it's street outreach and case management. And it doesn't matter if you're applying to the funder for those or whatever, just any of your suite of services, what are contributable to those. I think it'd be handy if you do them like we've done in the example. I don't really care about the semicolon, but if you would hit a return and kind of list them, that's helpful for us. And then again, think about your reviewers, just anything you can do. If you're, some of you probably review proposals. If you got to review 25 proposals, you think about that person and making it as easy as possible for them. You've got space for 5 outcomes, and then for each outcome, 3 indicators. I kind of wanted to put the indicator and then the percent, but I've lost the argument. So, or debate, I should say. And then here's the narrative. It actually hasn't changed too much. Pretty straightforward. But again, the great news is that's it on the performance measures. You don't have to go down for each service. The other big change I think will be good news is if you're not proposing it to the funder, so in this case the city, then all we need is the service name. That's it. So it should be a huge time. So this change to this form, I would guess, will cut your proposal submission time down by, I guess, probably 30%. Something I've been lobbying for. This is the trouble with like group forums and sharing forums. If it were just the city, we could probably be much more specific and kind of drive services in the form. So it is open. It has to be A, from the taxonomy, B, in the city proposals, it was on that RFP, right? But also we would have worked it out in the letter of intent, right? So on your approved letter of intent, you'll have a list of services. Some you'll be proposing to the city, some you won't, but they all go in here. But what's really critical, and this is like one of those things I can't control, it's on your end, kind of like selecting the right things on the cover sheet. The first service here, by the nature of the proposal, has to be something you're pitching to the city, right? I'll try to work with you on the letter of intent on the final one where it kind of flows so that you just look at that and say, okay, I'm listing these. So I've got 10 services, 3 of them I'm pitching to the city for, so the first 3. Please, 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 please put the ones you're pitching to the city first, okay? And we'll try to work on that in the letter of intent. And so in that sense, you know, the first 1 or 3 or 4 or whatever ought to be the ones you're pitching to the funder. And I think you can understand why, because those are going to get most of our attention. But this is a required field because you have to propose at least 1 service. And clearly it has to be a service you're proposing to the funder. So this would be a yes. Now, if it's no, there's nothing. It's just the name, right? And in the city RFPs, you're basically just looking at your letter of intent, okay? Now, if something changes, by the way, like let's say you get a month down or 3 weeks in and you're like, I dropped this service, just tell me that's fine. Just give me a heads up. Now, this will look actually very familiar if you've applied before. If you hit yes, I'm proposing this to city, you've got the detail of the service. Remember, in the other form, it was detail about the program and all the services. Here's some more detail about the service. The unit measure is critical. I think everybody in the room's been through that with us. And I think our Zoom friends have too. So let's say the unit measures, I don't know, the county's really moving us all towards 15 minutes if it's a time measure, or in the case of shelter, you know, one night, and then the unit rate. Now, all this is new because we don't work on this in the letter of intent typically. And then some narrative about how that was determined, and then the total number of units to service to be provided, right? So this is still like the old days, like even though you're pitching this to the city, let's say it's a shelter and you're gonna do 3,000 bed nights overall for the program. That goes there. And then you're gonna serve, now this is really critical and something I see. Let's say shelter's your only service. And you remember in the other form in our demographics, we said we were going to serve 200 people. If shelter is your only service, how many people do you think should be here? 200. It's right, because you only have 1 service. Now, if you have more than 1 service and you said, well, my program's going to serve 200 and I've got 3 services. Now, in some cases, all 200 might get the service, you know, but one thing I see that if we have a program and it only has 1 service, sometimes I see that the total people to be served by service doesn't match the total people to serve by the program. And it basically has to. I mean, there's no other way around it. So, and then these other fields are calculations. Then we get into, okay, you're proposing to the city, how much for this service? So in that example where you have 1 service in the program, the total amount proposed ought to be the same amount here, right? So if you're a shelter, and you do emergency shelter, I keep picking that one just because it's straightforward. Your city request is 50,000. Since you only have 1 service and that's the service you're pitching the city, this number ought to be 50,000. Conversely, if you have a program and you're asking for 50 and you offer 2 services, then they ought to add up, right? So it adds up actually at the bottom of this form. I see that all the time, you guys. I cannot tell you what a poor impression that leaves on the reviewers if you don't get the proposed amount, if you don't get it right to the agent or the funder you're asking money for, that puts the wrong foot forward. So make sure those align. And then it calculates, so this throws people sometimes too, but I mean, you already told us how much it's gonna cost. And you're asking us for this, so here's how many units you're asking us to buy. And here's that old question about why do you need the city money? Okay, which is, I won't spend a lot of time on that because I think it's fairly straightforward. The other greatly simplified section is, and it caused confusion because this is the one section of the old forms where you used to ask for the current instead of the proposed. This is just tell us who you plan on for this service having money for the proposed period, right? So let's say you know, you're going to apply for shelter from us. And you're also going to apply for United Way. It doesn't matter if you have it right now, if you anticipate having it during the proposed period. So the forms have shifted really to just talk about the proposed, other than like, you know, some current things about your organization and things like that, or current practices. Because, you know, if you think about it, it could be a brand new program, right? So everything is hypothetical, or it could be an existing program. And in the narratives and things, we understand if you're saying, hey, this is what we do and this is who we serve, even though it's certainly about what's being the proposed period. In this case, and in the budget, really what we're saying is, okay, what do you anticipate? It's a best guess. We don't really hold you to it. Now, I told, I think Charles a few weeks ago, or maybe it was somebody else, this is like the bowling alley analogy or bowling lane. Like if you say our revenues are going to be 300,000 and our, you know, and then you go to do the interim report. If you're at like halfway, 150 of your revenues, cool. But if you report that you have like $10,000 in revenues, that's when we're going to start having a question. So I guess what I'm saying is we know this is just proposed. We don't expect the final budget when you report to match this. It ought to be probably close, but it might be. And we give you the chance to explain this, that, hey, we lost a $100,000 grant. This is what happened. So here we really try to work on just saying, for this service, because we already saw in the budget what you anticipate from other funders, but for this particular service. So think about our perspective. If you're pitching to the city something that is, we know kind of that you said you're going to apply to the county, or you know, let's say the county through the budget for the program. And let's say it's a service in here that clearly is in the wheelhouse of the county, and you don't click that this particular service is going to be something, then that helps us have those conversations with you and maybe the county to say, well, wait a minute, you know, this is clearly like, okay, this is children's therapy. Like you ought to be applying to the county for this. This is just one of those things that we try to simplify, but still give us an idea. And keep in mind, the difference is you told us about the program, but for this service, what about this service? That's kind of the difference. And that's it. That's the section now for the services you're applying for. So let's say the next service is a program service, but you're not applying to the city for it. You just hit no, and maybe you're done there. I think, again, I think this will cut your workload significantly. That's that. I'm sure you guys have questions, but we are a little over on time. Let me stop sharing. I'm looking at the chat. I don't see anything. I don't know if our Pam or Debbie, if you guys have questions. Any questions for me? I guess the thing I would end on is, you know what? I closed that too early. I'm sorry, you guys. Let me do this real quick if you have a second. Okay, just quickly, let's say we created our two forms. I should have mentioned this. Okay, right here. We didn't, well, like in this case, we didn't submit the required, like we didn't create this other form, but let's say we did. A lot every year, somebody has created and filled out both forms, everything's ready to go, and they did not hit this button. At 5 p.m. on the 31st, if you haven't submitted your proposal, it's not submitted. Right? Because see, what happens on my end is like people are like, well, can't you just hit that for me? And you got to understand the position you're asking me to submit your proposal for you. And I work for the government. I'm not a little foundation or whatever. That is not fair. And I don't think it's too much to ask for people just to take that final step to say submit proposal. Every year this happens. Go ahead, Charlie.
Will there be some type of email or something back then?
You know, we've struggled with that. You will see here, it'll lock your form, so you'll know it. And let me see if I can save this. And Let's go to the folder. So Charles, you're fairly new. So these are the two forms you have to complete per program, right? So let's say you fill them out, they're done, they're both here, and you hit submit proposal. Okay, it's locked. Those records are locked. Okay, you can see that you cannot, you no longer have that submit button. If you submit it early and you want to edit, just email me and I'll unlock them for you. That happens once in a while
Those two
too.
forms are done, and the other things we did was come back out and then submit back.
Yeah, and I did that, so that's why you don't see it here anymore. The other thing though that isn't part of the submit is the org profile. So another thing that trips people up is they submitted their proposal, but they didn't finish updating the org profile. So if I go in there that following Monday and it's incomplete, it's also unresponsive, but it had nothing to do with the fact that you submitted the proposal forms. Okay. Especially if you're new to the process, if it were me, I would try to get this thing done the Friday before it's due and say, Steve, would you take a quick look at this for me? I can't promise you I can do it, especially at this pandemic, but I always try to take the time to do it for folks. I will also say it's not a guarantee. It may be I email you Monday and say, hey, it wasn't complete. Remember I told you I gave it a quick scan. It's kind of not my job really, but since we're local and I work with all you guys, I'm happy to try to take a gander at it. That's my recommendation is don't wait till that last week. Oh yeah, thanks Terry. Folks want to stay. Sorry, I'm not used to this. In my Apricot tools, I don't put these on the website because I kind of don't want anybody to just get to them. In my shared files, so you guys, and then we have it by funder. I have that old program outcomes. I'm sorry, I've got the old, we'll probably update these reporting instructions, but I've got the, oh, I thought I uploaded. I'll need to upload the new proposal submission instructions here. I'll put those up as soon as I get out of here. And then the old performance measures information, but just note that we put that in the form, so it's all there. I might even just take that out. And then here are the two forms. These are the new forms. And you can actually download them in Word. And don't send me these, obviously, but honestly, like when I do proposals for the county, I do this. I just do them in Word. And then I copy and paste. You have to be a little careful when you copy and paste, you know, just make sure it went in there right. So I just have it set up as tables. And I think the county and United Way are gonna, these are the same. We're all using these. I worked on, this is my job to work on these. And so it should follow the proposal forms exactly. And we've even got notes in there about kind of what's required in the character limits. And I don't know. I think that's one of those things where I'm writing a lot of grants too, and I appreciate the ability to work out of a web-based system. So they're both there. Thank you for the reminder. So I think that's it. Any other questions? Like I said, email is 100% the way to get me. Just shoot me an email if you need anything, and then just shoot me those letters of intent. We'll start those talks, and then we'll get the site visits scheduled. And thank you. Sorry we ran a little bit over. I was trying to give a little more detail on the new forms. Sure. The reporting. Oh, you know, I've never done it, but the question is when we share the recording. I'll tell you what, I'll put it up on the website. I'll try to do it this afternoon. I got a couple meetings, but I'll try to get all this stuff fixed, and you know, we'll fix. I think we saw an issue with the logic on the United Way, and then I need to upload those new instructions, and then yeah, I'll try to share the recording of this session, and I think I'll try to put it up on the website. The only caveat is that I can't edit our website right now because it's in this transitional phase, so I have to ask Christian to do that, so it could be a little delay. Cool. let's see. I'm gonna go back. Pam or Debbie, did you guys have any questions? They might be sleeping at this point. It was a thrilling presentation. Anyway, I want to thank you guys. Thanks for hanging with us a little longer. Just want to get the detail on those new forms to you guys, because this is probably your first time seeing them. Thank you. Appreciate it, guys.